Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 23, Dimir Graveyard Spells. March of the Machine dropped last Tuesday on Magic the Gathering Arena, and Dimir is an early frontrunner. I speculated that blue and black were going to be top-performing colors in my first impressions video, and I was not wrong. I've gotten back-to-back trophies with the archetype, and so here is how I've been approaching the archetype. My Tier S Mythic level common is Preening Champion. I knew this card was going to be good, but I didn't know it was going to be this good. It's a 2/2 flyer that spawns a 1/1 token for 3. Similar to Dimir is interested in creating a larger board. So, there are a fair number of spells with Convoke that benefit off of having an extra body on the board, and the early flying has also been great for flipping battles. Overall, I've come down on the battle cards from my first impressions, but there is a top performer that we'll get to when we talk about the uncommons. My Tier 1 common is Afara's Dispersal. For 3 mana, you can return target creature to its owner's hand and then Surveil 2, and it only costs 1 blue if the target creature is attacking. This card works wonders against the commons that transform, or the double-sided cards, because it can essentially time walk your opponent for 1 mana. Afara's Dispersal and Final Flourish are why I'm way down on most of the double-sided commons, like Order of the Mirror. I've also found myself playing it at full cost to remove a Phyrexian token quite often, and the Surveil works nicely since you are aiming to have some graveyard synergies in your deck. Now for Tier 2. Eyes of Gytaxis is a card to keep your eye on. My speculation that it was going to be undervalued early seems to be correct, as I was able to snag 5 in a deck that led to my second Dimir trophy. For 3, you draw a card and incubate 3. It's a little slow if you're just getting completely steamrolled, since you have to pay 2 to make the 3/3 into a creature, but the set isn't as fast as Phyrexia All Will Be One, and I've found the 3/3 pairs nicely against my opponent's 2/2 Grizzly Bears. I've also liked the fact that this is a spell, since there are a couple of cards that interact with your non-creature spells in your graveyard in this archetype. Now here's one that came to me as a bit of a surprise, or I've come up on. I had originally had it as a filler card, but now I put Temporal Cleansing at Tier 2. For 4 with Convoke, you return target non-land permanent into their library, and your opponent chooses whether it is second from the top or on the bottom. This is great on large Phyrexian tokens, Sari, Golgari, and Orsov. It's great on transformed double-face cards, and the Convoke plays nicely with cards like Preening Champion that fill your board with 1/1 tokens. Do keep in mind that it is sorcery speed, but it has overperformed in every archetype I've tried it in, so keep your eyes out for this one. Here is one that is less of a surprise. Deadly Derision. Grim Bounty from AFR at instant speed. Who would have guessed? It's good. For 4, but double pip black, you destroy target creature or planeswalker and create a treasure token. I put it at Tier 2. The double pip is really all that's holding it back. Black has interesting things to do with the treasure as a sacrifice outlet, especially in Rakdos. In Dimir, it's a little bit less of options of what you can do with it, but there is always Final Flourish. For 2, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. But if you pay the kicker and sacrifice an artifact or a creature, it's -6/-6. I put this at Tier 3. As people learn how much it sucks to transform a creature and get time-walked by this card, I imagine its usefulness will decrease, but at the beginning of the set, I've been really impressed with this card. It also works just as a 2-cost combat trick. Next up at Tier 3, we have Ichor Drinker, a 1/1 lifelink for 1 that you can pay 1 black to exile from your graveyard to incubate 2. Hitting this with a backup 1 off of something like Saiba Cryptomancer or Scornblade Berserker to make it into a 2/2 lifelink has given me enough cushion to survive my opponent's early pressure. There are also a couple of cards that mill you, as well as your opponent, that I plan on playing, so most of the time this is included because of the graveyard synergy. Vanquish the Weak is one that I can't quite decide if it is tier 3 or if it is filler, but let's say it is tier 3 for now. As people learn that the grizzly bears aren't as important as they were in 1, and maybe people come down on the transform cards as well, then I imagine the value of this card will come down. However, it's really good at snagging the annoying 2/2 flyers like Preening Champion, so I still think it'll have a place at filler. It's also very good against the backup plan of Boros, as killing the target they were going to give the +1/+1 counter pretty much stops the archetype in its tracks. Against the Grind Fest, which I think will be how most of the games are going to play out, if either of my 2+ hour long trophy videos tell me anything, then this card becomes a bad card to top deck in the late game. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Nezumi Informant, a 1/1 for 2 that when it enters the battlefield, your opponent discards a card. It's much better in the Grind Fest, but not as good if you're getting completely run over by Boros backup. This card is significantly better in Rakdos, where you aim to use it as sacrifice fodder later, but I've enjoyed it enough to put it at tier 3 in Dimir. I imagine I'll be coming up on this card as the set slows down, but only time will tell. Now for the uncommons, and the real reason that Dimir is the top performing archetype. My tier S mythic level uncommon is Invasion of Amonkhet. People are sleeping on this card, at least for now. For 1, a blue and a black, each player mills 3 cards, your opponent discards a card, and you draw a card. This card has a lot going for it. The mill helps fill the graveyard, which your archetype is aiming to do. It automatically puts you up a card since they discard and you draw, and then it flips into Lazotep Convert, a 4/4 that copies any creature in either graveyard. I'm trying to think of the most busted things that I've hit with this, but the list is long. The Gloomfang Mauler comes to mind, the land cycling menace creature with backup 2 at common and black, since then this is a 6/6 menace. But who wants to just copy a common, right? It does trigger enter the battlefield the effects, and I think the possibilities of what you can copy this into are quite endless. At tier 1, we have possibly the best removal in black. It's close with Deadly Derision. For 3, target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn with Convoke. The -3/-3 clears almost all of the early threats, but the best part is catching your opponent off guard when you can play this with all of your mana tapped. It's also just a single pip in black, so it's easier to cast if you do end up mostly blue. Next up at tier 2, we have Captive Weird. This has been better in the more aggressive strategies of Izzet, blue-red, or Azorius, white-blue. But it transforms into a 3/3, and it allows you to dig for gas a little bit sooner. But remember, flipping on turn 3 is a dangerous game. Still, a 1/3 does a good job of gumming up the early pressure, and then later you can flip it to find an answer. Next up at tier 2, we have Scornblade Berserker, a 0/1 for 1 with backup 1 that can tap for 1 to sacrifice itself to draw a card. Better in Rakdos, where you can get more payoff of the sacrifice ability, but this card has been great at coming in as a 1/2, or giving a flyer a +1/+1, or sacrificing a creature that has been hit by enchantment removal. It's an early play that still is all right, and then later in the game is something I'm, it gives you late game card draw, is something that I'm very interested in, and it has been working wonders for me, so I recommend you check it out. Now for Tier 3, and we have 5 uncommons all duking it out. First up, we have Artistic Refusal, another card that I wasn't super high on during my first impressions, but have come up on after playing. I like it in every blue archetype except for Azorius, and I think it is best in Izzet because of the Convoke. In Dimir, you also have enough creatures, maybe not as many 1/1s as Izzet, because Izzet has RAL's reinforcements, but still enough to convoke this pretty cheaply. And countering your opponent's spell while also drawing 2 and discarding 1 is good the grindier the match is. And as I mentioned, I think it is just going to get grindier from here on out. Next up, we have Skyclave Aerialist. A 2/1 flyer for 2 is great, especially since Dimir has the best battle card in the game, at least at uncommon. And then later in the game, this can transform into Skyclave Invader. Not great for 4 and a green Phyrexian mana, but when you are top decking against your opponent or really need something to stop your opponent's 2/2 flyers, it's nice to have. Next up, we have Merciless Repurposing. This is usually too expensive, and I put it at filler in the other black archetypes, but you want all of the removal for your Dimir control shenanigans. I tend to be very creature light, very spell heavy in this archetype, and for 4 and double pip black, you can exile target creature and incubate 3. It's not great, but I'm looking to run Collective Nightmare, Deadly Derision, Final Flourish, Vanquish the Weak. Basically, if it is black removal, grab it. The name of the game in this set is Building the Biggest Snowball, and in Dimir, it's about removing your opponent's snow. Blight Reaper Thallid is my next Tier 3 uncommon. Nothing particularly special about it in Dimir, but being a grizzly bear that once you pay 3 and a Phyrexian green, it flips into Blight Sower Thallid, a 3/3 that spawns a 1/1 when it transforms, and then another 1/1 when it dies. So 5/5 worth of stats spread over 3 bodies. Works well with Convoke. The tokens are nice sacrifice fodder, and can help you cast Artistic Refusal. But a word of warning. You want to eventually transform this guy, but be careful about when you do it. If your opponent has 2 mana untapped on the other side, I think it is a very risky play to flip this on turn 3. Render Inert is only a contender for Tier 3 because of how good Invasion of Amonkhet is. When you have the best battle at uncommon, a card that immediately flips it, and that is card neutral, can be very important. If you don't have multiple copies of Invasion of Amonkhet, then I come down a little bit on this, but in the worst case, it can remove up to a 5/5 Phyrexian token, so it still has a use. But sometimes a battle is good just for its front side, and flipping it is just a bonus, like Invasion of Eldraine. Invasion of Eldraine is the only other battle at uncommon that I think is worth playing in Dimir. With the Nezumi Informant, Invasion of Amonkhet also makes the opponent discard, so a Mind Rot for 1 more mana, is usually enough to snag the last 2 cards in your opponent's hand. After you get through the 4 defense, it flips into Prickle Fairies! A 2/2 flyer that at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, if they have 2 or fewer cards, it deals 2 damage to them. Unlike Invasion of Amonkhet, it's a little bit more of a decision about whether it is worth resources to flip into Prickle Fairies, but if their hand is empty, you at least get 2 damage back immediately, and it has won me some games. Now for the rares, and let me tell you, there are a lot of bomb rares in this set. And part of the reason why Dimir is so awesome is that you have a lot of removal, so you can answer the crazy bombs that your opponent has. My Tier 1 rare is Breach the Multiverse. For 5 and double pit black, each player mills 10 cards. Then you get to put the best creature or planeswalker from each graveyard into play under your control. Especially with so many cards that mill each player, this can just be a game ender since your opponent will draw from their deck first. I would be wary if you are playing against the mirror match, though, especially if this doesn't finish out the rest of their deck, because they too have cards that mill, and it becomes a game about who will deck first. My next tier S rare is Hoarding Broodlord. For 5 and triple pip black, you get a 7/6 flyer, but it does have Convoke. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a card, exile it face down, and for as long as it remains exiled, you can play it. Spells you cast from exile have Convoke. So if this creature dies, you can still cast the card from exile, just not with Convoke. A 7/6 flyer ends the game pretty quickly, and fetching your best card for the following turn, no matter what, is fantastic. Hidetsugu and Kairi is also tier 1. I've had the honor of playing with this card 2 times in my 13 or so drafts I've done so far, and it has always been a top performer. For 2 and double pip blue and a single pip black, you get a 5/4 flyer that brainstorms when it enters the battlefield, drawing 3 cards and putting 2 on the top of your library. And the 2 can come from your hand previously. Then, if it dies, you exile the top card of your library. The opponent loses life equal to its mana cost, regardless of what type of card it is, something that I've messed up. I thought it only triggered on instants and sorceries. Then, if it's an instant or sorcery, you can play it for free. Card advantage on a late game threat that does cool stuff if your opponent removes it. What more can you ask for? Now for tier 2, Chrome Host Seed Shark is amazing. A 2/4 flyer for 3 is a great stat block just by itself, especially with how many 2/2 flyers there are, like Preening Champion. And then all your non-creature spells, which I tend to have a very spell-heavy deck in Dimir, turn into Incubate X, where X is the spell's mana value. My last tier 2 rare is Invasion of Fiora. For 4 double pip black, you get a Selective Wrath that can either destroy all legendary, or all non-legendary, or both. If you can set it up so you're the only player with a legendary creature left behind, then this is absolutely amazing. Another way this can play out, though, is by developing incubator tokens with cards like Eyes of Gytaxius, and just setting yourself up to be better off after the Wrath comes down. Then, for 4 toughness, you can flip it into Marchesa Resolute Monarch, a 3/6 Death Touch Menace that whenever it attacks, it removes all counters from up to 1 target permanent. So it kills incubator tokens on sight, it automatically flips battles, or it destroys planeswalkers. Then, if you haven't been dealt combat damage, it turns into a Phyrexian Arena and draws you a card for 1 life. I think I'm going to have to limit it to tier S, tier 1, and tier 2 going forward. We'll see. But for right now, the list is just too long of all of the rares that I would usually mention. And this guide is supposed to be mostly about commons and uncommons, right? If you're interested in my full tier list, I'll put the link in the description below. I try to update it nearly daily at the start of a set, as we do our best to figure out what the top performing cards are. But for now, for the mythics. It's still a little early, but I can mention a couple top performers. Sheoldred has been very impressive as a 4/5 menace for 3 double pip black that edicts, causing your opponent to sacrifice a non-token creature or planeswalker. Then for 5, you can exile her if your opponent has 8 or more cards in your graveyard, which luckily is this archetype's theme, and she flips into the True Scriptures. First, you destroy their best creature or planeswalker. Second, your opponent discards 3 cards and mills 3. Then third, you put all creatures from all graveyards, including your opponent's, onto the battlefield under your control. If that doesn't win you the game, I don't know what will. Another top performer is Invasion of Innistrad. For 2 double pip black, you give target creature -13/-13, which destroys even the biggest of baddies, like Galta, in the set. Then for 5 toughness, it flips into Deluge of the Dead, an enchantment that creates 2/2/2 zombie tokens when it enters the battlefield. Then for 2 and a swamp, you can exile target card from a graveyard, very handy in the mirror, and create a 2/2 black creature token. The other Sheoldred, yes, there are 2 in this set. The Whispering one has also been a top performer, a 6/6 with Swamp Walk that at the beginning of your upkeep returns a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and at the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, they have to sacrifice a creature. While not as game-winning as her doppelganger, it still is a great bomb that demands an answer. That's it for Dimir. Next week, I'll be diving into another archetype, so if you have one that you want done next, just let me know in the comments below. Also, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe, and thank you for enjoying my guide to Dimir. I hope it helps you get the 70% win rate that I've been experiencing with this archetype, and I will see you all next week.